welcome everybody to this session, and I'm very sure that you would leave the hall feeling more enriched with the knowledge of art and culture when it comes from a maverick like Alka Pandey herself. Alka Pandey, I just don't know where to begin and then once I begin, where to end. A writer, a historian, and a maverick of art and culture, a doctorate on the study of Ardhnarishwar, with special reference to Indian sculptures. She has recently come out with a book, Body Sutra, a book that examines the role and representation of human body in diverse cultures. What we consider basically a biological structure or just an anatomical put together has been portrayed as a site of art and violence and symbol and landscape of cultural churning. When you look at Alka-ji, all you can see is a beauty and the grace of the person herself, which manifests itself even more potently, more forcefully and more powerfully and even more brilliantly in this lovely, lovely book, Body Sutra. We will be talking to her about this book today. So over to Alka-ji to begin with why you wrote, what you wrote, and your PowerPoint presentation, which will be interjected with the questions from me.
I just want to first thank Manjari and the Pune Literature Festival for inviting me here to share my work. It's a lovely platform, and I think it's always, as an author and a writer, wonderful to share work in different parts of the country. I know with YouTube and technology, people can download and look at anything at the press of a button, but somehow I'm still a dinosaur, and I believe in personal interactions which make things even more private and intimate in a way. I'm delighted actually to have Mona as my moderator again, because we have done a couple of sessions last year together, and it is always again comforting to have somebody who's empathetic and appreciative of your work. So it makes, it makes the discussion a little more warm and inclusive. And then two women together, with due apologies to the wonderful men who are here, I think that the creative or the emotional side, this is a scientific fact, is more evolved with the female principle. So those men who have a more evolved female principle can have a greater range of creativity. Otherwise, they do say the rational male and the emotional female. Mona asked me, why did I write Body Sutra? Actually, I was commissioned to doing this book by Ravi Singh, who was in Penguin earlier and had joined Aleph and wanted me to continue with my work because he was aware of the work I had done much earlier, my doctoral work, which was on Ardhanari Ishwara, the Lord who is half woman. So when I was studying Ardhanarishwar, it was really a study of Purush and Prakriti, Shiv and Parvati, the negative and the positive, the yin and the yang. And most of it, if you look at India, it's all about storytelling, and you have to go back to the Purans. The Vedas and the books of knowledge, Aranyakas, Upanishads, they are even the essence of the Mahabharata, which is the Gita. They are very abstract, deeply thought out philosophical principles. And I personally feel that you need a bridge, you need a kind of an enlightened guru to help you guide, to understand, and then you do your own interpretation of these books of knowledge. So when Ravi asked me, after seeing a lot of work which I had done with Indian art, he said, look, you must do something on the Indian body. And he suggested the title Sutra. And I jumped at the idea because while after my postdoctoral, I started kind of inhabiting the contemporary spaces of Indian art, my entire work as an art historian and as an academic was based on antiquities, pre-modern art, traditional art, and that is all. The body, the Indian body is central to that. Whether you look at the illustrations of the Ramayana, you look at the illustrations of the Mahabharata, whether they are in illustrated manuscripts or they are in miniature paintings, the body is very central. Whether it is the Nayak Naika, whether it is the Ragamalas, every philosophical concept has been given the shape, the human shape. So from Nirgun, it is all Sagun. And what you see is the human body is very, very important, because if you look at even Shiva, which is actually a philosophy, or Brahma, which is, there's only apparently one temple of Brahma in Pushkar, what do you see? You see the gods being made in the image of man, even though they are supra-human beings. And the person who gave the gods a face in Indian art is our great modernist painter, Raja Ravi Verma, because with his printing press, he brought in calendars, and everybody started actually worshipping those calendars. So if you go to even a poor person's house, and if they can't afford a murti, there will be a calendar with a diya jala in front of it. So this image, which was made so popular by Ravi Verma, becomes actually an icon of worship. So that is how the process of the Body Sutra started.
And you begin this beautiful book with an introductory quote cited from the Upanishads, which says, "In the beginning, it was a self alone in the shape of a person, Purusha. He looked around, saw nothing but his self. He first said, 'This is I,' and he became I by name. But he felt no delight. He wished for a second. He was so large as man and wife together. He then made this self to fall into two parts, and hence arose the husband, the pati, and wife, the patni. He embraced her." Such a befitting quote to what follows in the book. More on why you chose to begin the book with this quote.
So this is actually the Brihad Upanishad, and these books are books of knowledge. And if you look at one of the, see, in India we have many stories, and you choose whichever story you want. चाहे आप गणेश की लीजिए, चाहे अभी ये जो नवरात्रि शुरू हो रही हैं, there are many stories about the why are Navratris, why are there 7 Ratris of the 9 goddesses. Every state will have some kind of turn and twist to it. But I took this quote because there is one concept called the Hiranyagarbha concept, which is the golden egg theory, and it is generally believed that the Brahmand was, and I'm going to show you an image of that, the Brahmand was actually in the shape of a sphere. When this sphere cracked, the other one later I'll come to is the Samudra Manthan, where the whole thing,
the Sura Asura.
Yes, the fight and Amrit which comes out of this. So this Hiranyagarbha story is how did the opening or the breaking or the golden egg take place, and the Brahmand was broken and earth happened. So it was this sphere, and it cracked open, and it is said that there was man and woman which was created from there, and that was a parallel with the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad on this thing of the self, of the self-referential. And this sphere is also taken to be the ithyphallic symbol of Shiva, which is the phallus, which is the linga, which is supposed to be the icon for Shiva. So this is actually an abstract principle from which the Ananga, with no form, that body emerges. And then I will take you to the body of most of the bodies which I will now show you will be after the first, second, third century, because in the Indus Valley, which I haven't shown, because I'm sure most of you would know it, and if you don't, you can just press your Wikipedia and Google it, is first the dancing girl, which is a small little figurine. Yeah, you all know.
Waif-like
Yeah,
thin
small.
girl.
So she's naked, and she's got she's bejeweled. She's got bangles, and it is a naked body, because in India, nudity was not a problem. This comes from the West.
Yes.
So if you read Kenneth Clark, The Naked and the Nude, it's a huge concept in that. So nakedness was not a thing. And you see this Indus Valley girl, she's completely without any coquettishness, and she stands in her naked body. There is the red male torso, which we call again in terracotta, and a priest, the Harappan priest, who's shown with his eyes half open with a kind of a sandhati or a shawl over him. But what I'm going to show you now are certain images from pre-modern India, and what I've done is I've divided my book into 4 sections, because it is actually imagination through art and literature. So one part of my book is on art, which is painting and sculpture till modernity, and in the contemporary I've included photography, because you can't keep technology out. Here some of the most beautiful images were pre-Hindu, which meant Buddhists, many of them. And here what is also very interesting is India was quite global and cosmopolitan, which in fact I think we are not that global and cosmopolitan today as we were in pre-modern India, because we had Alexander come into India in the time of the Mauryan period, which was the 3rd century BC. And what did Alexander bring with him? He brought in a fabulous language, visual language of art, which comes through a kind of a classical Hellenistic period, where the ideal body, where the proportions of the ideal body, which is Hellenistic Greece, and that is the basis of a lot of classical sculpture which comes in. Later when you talk of the Renaissance, it is actually Renaissance, rebirth. What does rebirth mean? Going back to Greek antiquity. So what do you see in these figures? We will, as we go to the body, you will see a Indianization of the body, but this is actually a more foreign body, more Greek body, and even the transparent robes that he's wearing are like the Greek togas that you see there. So this is a figure of an early Buddhist in the 1st century. Then this is the Yakshi, the figurine of a female body, which is pre-modern goddess, which is associated with magic and fertility, 2nd century. And if you see, this looks quite like the Medusa. If you look at the Medusa of Greek antiquity, again, Greek pagan myths, you see a lot of similarity between Greek, Roman and Indian myths. Poseidon, the lord of the sea, Varuna. We also worship the elements. So pagan religion was a religion which was worshipping the elements, and this is also very, very similar. Elements, Nagas, all that. Now, these are the beautiful Yakshis, which is from the Mathura period. And what you see here is the emergence of the Indian feminine form. And what you see, most of them, they are actually naked. And nobody looks at them with any kind of pornographic or sexual intent. They are in all public spaces. It is only now that people start mutilating them. They've never been mutilated in the ancient past, whether it is Khajuraho, whether it is Konark, wherever, whichever temples you see. And here also, look at these lovely Chulakoka. These are the 3 Yakshis which were found from Mathura in the pillars, and they are gorgeous. And if you look at them, you'll also see that the Indian body is of women is quite like that. We are not the Kate Mosses with, you know, flat stomachs and small breasts and almost no bottoms. Indian women have childbearing hips. They have a nipped in waist. They always have a little bit of a stomach. In fact, the 3 folds which you'll see later in the lower stomach were signs of great beauty. I'll also have the Didar Ganjakshi later, you will see that. Mona, you have to be my timekeeper because I may just get
that's
carried
okay.
away.
Yeah,
You know
because I
too
have the
much.
questions.
So I'll quickly run through it.
Yeah.
Now this is from Ajanta, again murals, painting, the Jatak tales. Again you see diaphanous clothes, you see the woman's breasts, you see a very feminized Buddha. Now this is an Indian kind of iconography coming in, an Indian visual language coming in. This is a fabulous Gauri Lajja. This is the Lajja Gauri, where this woman is in a childbearing thing. Now, in fact, if you go to Kamakhya now, you will see the Devi is being dressed in a little skirt, which is, she's been covered. This kind of imagery is now very difficult to spot. But here you see this goddess Ambika. And this Ambika is from Jain. So where Jain Dharma is very minimalistic, very powerful, but look at the sensuality. Indian art is full of rasa. And the theory of rasa comes from the Natya Shastra. Our basis of Indian aesthetics comes from the Natya Shastra, which is supposed to be also the 5th Veda. Now this is Lord Vishnu. After Shiva, or the Nataraj image, which is the most common image in India, Vishnu is another very common image. You know the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, again in the form of man. This is the goddess Ganga with her attendants. This is a beautiful Mukhalingam, which is the phallus or the linga having different faces of Shiva. So these are beautiful images which I've got you from pre-modern India, and you have to
And
just
yes,
stop
a
me, Mona,
question.
because,
You know, it's your book. You need to speak about it for them to understand the book better. It's
Okay,
your day.
but I
Go on.
shouldn't,
No,
you know.
but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You've written about the metaphorical bodies and
Yeah.
Shiva as
Yeah.
the supreme being without the linga too. In Shiv Purana, he categorically states and asserts his presence without any other physical manifestation of himself and just the linga. So how about that?
So, you know, again, this is, you know, how I think, I don't know how many of you came for Devdutt's session, which Mona so beautifully moderated. If you see, if you were there, he made an interesting point, which I also believe, that, you know, our texts, it's not like codified. None of our texts will tell you, it's not like the Bible, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not tell a lie. They are deeply reflexive and interpretive. So people who are studying the Shaiva Agams or the Shiva Purans, people who are interpreting these texts, what is understood is that Shiva is the most primordial god and he is the gods of the gods. So in the beginning, he was an idea. If you look at Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. So that which is Satya is Shiva and that is beauty. So what is that? Truth is beauty. So truth, Ekam Satya. Bahuda, Vipra, I've forgotten the third thing. That there is only one truth, which is Shiva. People call it by different names. Different sages call it by different names. So this is the reason why he is actually, Shiva is looked at also in a lot of Ananga.
Yes.
So without body, without form,
without
from
form.
the formless. So you dive from the formless into the form.
Shiva
From the
to
Arupa.
Shankar.
Yeah, exactly.
Shiva to Shankar.
Yes.
But why is the phallus worshipped and never the yoni? Is
Yoni
there
is
any
worshipped.
culture where the yoni is worshipped?
Yes, Yoni Kamakhya.
Oh,
Kamakhya
yes.
is a huge, it is the Yoni site.
Because the confluence of Purush and Prakriti
Yeah.
is what keeps, it's without
So-
that life is not
So
possible.
Yoni, there is a huge amount of Yoni worship. In fact, the Kamakhya is the Yoni temple. I am not a great expert on Tantra, and I would be hesitant to talk knowledgeably about it, but definitely there is Yoni worship in tantric rituals, and also the yoni. If you look at the puja of the Devi, the double triangle which is done and the center, that is the kind of representation
of the
yoni.
But in the book you have spoken about tantric iconography quite a bit.
Yeah,
You have in
I
this
have,
book.
but I don't really like to be speaking with that authority, because it's a 10th century, very cultic sect and rather closed. So if there's a tantric scholar, I don't want to get into a confrontation.
There. So you also spoke about the pagan cults here, and the
Yeah.
phallus has been mentioned in pagan cults that incorporated black magic and sorcery in their worshipping rituals. How did Shaivism revive and redefine the attributes in Vedic texts in the 2nd century?
So, you know, the phallus is a kind of, again, it's about masculinity, it's about power, it's a seed giver, it is the source of life, and Shiva is kind of associated with that. Then what happens is the male patriarchy comes into play in a big way, and then they kind of enfold it and engulf it and bring it into the structured way of it being worshipped, and they kind of, in the Agam texts, they start giving it a very definitive structure, size, the Swayambhu, where the Shivaling happens on its own, Kedarnath, it is a Swayambhu. Then there is a Achal Linga, there is a Chal Linga, so lingas which move. So the linga becomes a formalized structure, and that's how it comes into
And
Vedic
various
thought.
manifestations of it.
Absolutely.
Various manifestations. Because generally people see the linga as how they see in the Shiva temples.
Yeah.
That is the only interpretation that they know. But this is a big revelation for all of us to know about the various other manifestations there. And you also spoke of the Yakshis and the Yakshas, which are a far cry from the Harappan girl, as you said.
Yeah.
So where did the change come in from? It is, you said that Alexander brought with him another stream of thought.
Yeah.
But was it the same time?
Well, Alexander brought in the Greco-Roman kind of iconography, where he brought in the Controposito, where the linear three, where the body is divided into an S. But with the Gupta period,
Yes.
when Indian art started getting its own kind of language, you see it is called the golden period or the classical period, even in sculpture. And what is interesting is that there is a huge regional kind of divide. The North Indian, the Far East, where you have Bengal, Calcutta, where the morphology changes, and South India. Now in South India also you have different aspects. The Hoysala art is very decorative, it's almost Rococo, and then you come down to the Chola. And what you look at the Chola from Tamil Nadu and the Nayak rulers which were there, the bodies become fuller. And you'll see most of the bodies are very full bodies.
And elegant and delicate and with lots of adornments in the Gupta period, because the sensuous and the sexual part of it, they try to masquerade it slightly. They try to tone it down during the Gupta period.
No, I think it was at its best, because if you even look at, it becomes more beautiful than the monumental types of the
Okay.
Mathura period. Because if
Okay.
you look at the Mathura Yakshas and you look at the Mathura Yakshis, they are slightly more
Powerful.
powerful and heavy. The Gupta period gets very classical and very beautiful.
Aesthetic.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
aesthetic, more graceful, more delicate
Yeah.
in its form.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could go on with the medieval, otherwise we'll lose
Yeah,
out
I'll
on
just
time.
quickly do the medieval, because I think we may run out of time.
Yes.
So here, glasses.
Be
Yeah.
careful.
So the Surasundari. Now I'm going to come. You'll see a lot of them in Khajuraho. You know, if you go to Khajuraho, nowhere in the world, believe you me, has the female form being celebrated as it is celebrated in Khajuraho. You'll see women in different aspects of their toilet. You will see them writing books. They are beautiful, absolutely stunning. And yes, that is a place where you will see Mithuna and Maithuna couple. Now Mithuna is couples who are alingan, embrace. Mithun is where they are copulating. So what are you seeing in the exterior of the temple? Every aspect of your life. How do you dress? How do you adorn? When you come of age, you naturally get attracted. All that is there. Why is it shown in the exterior of the temples? Because until you do not go through all the ashrams of life, how will you actually go into sannyas? That is the beauty of Hindu religion. That this is one religion where every god has a lover or a wife, and everybody, there is no concept of sin and there is no concept of the Immaculate Conception. So, ras bhara hua hai. People have enjoyed every rasa, from Vatsalya, where it is mother to child, to Vilas, which is pleasure, to Shringar, which is the Rasaraj, to Bibhasta, which is disgust, to Veer, which is bravery. So you have every aspect of emotion, and the sculptures show a lot of emotion, but a lot of it is to do with Shringar and Shanta. So this is a Surasundari. This is the goddess Parvati, which is also the cover of my book. This is a Chola bronze. This is the fabulous Nataraj, or the Lord of Dance, medieval. You see he's a very slim Shiva standing on the dwarf of ignorance. This is Vishnu. This is Kali, beautiful Kali from Kerala. So what I'm trying to show you is from different regions as well. So you see different variations also of the gods and the goddesses and the visual language, how it changes. Now I'm also coming to miniature painting and showing you the portrait of Emperor Jahangir. Bundi painting. From big large frescoes we are coming to handheld, more intimate work. Noor Jahan. The Kangra Kalam, look at the delicacy and the beauty. And when you look at all this, when you look at these miniature paintings and you actually see the village women of Kangra, you'll find so much resemblance between them. Because where did the artists get their inspiration from? From the women they saw. This is Raja Ravi Varma.
So very aptly said that first it is the dharma, then the artha, and then the kama, and then finally you attain the moksha. So you need to go through that entire cycle, come full circle, and then attain the moksha, as you spoke about all those paintings on the exterior of the temple. But as you spoke about Mughal art, but what generally people maintain that, you know, art started buttoning up or started becoming very prudish at the advent of the Mughal period. But generally what you say in the book is it is with the British, with the British era. So why do people believe that it was a Mughal period where it started?
See, Mughal art does not have the human body, if you notice, because unke dharam mein kehte hain, the Quran really says that you don't show the human body. That is why many illustrations of the Quran and also the mosques, they have flowers, they have the
lotus.
More flowers in the Pietra Dura, lotus, yes, but not as much as in our Buddhist art as we have. But having said that, the rulers were great patrons. If you look at the miniature paintings, Darbar art, portraiture, Jahangir portraiture, the hunting paintings of the Akbar period, and the beautiful paintings of Darbar art of Shah Jahan. But they also had a lot of pleasure albums because the Mughal rulers were great pleasure seekers. अफीम भी खाते थे, शराब भी पीते थे, तो वो उनका धर्म और लाइफ में फर्क बहुत था.
There was a dichotomy.
There was a huge dichotomy, and a lot of Kama Sutra books and a lot of erotic books were done at the patronage of the rulers themselves. So on the face of it, their religion prohibited showing their body, but in their private lives there was no taboo. All the dancing girls, the mujras, the Noch girls, they believed a lot in that. But yes, it was the Victorian prudery where, if you look at Michel Foucault's book on the history of sexuality, even the sandwiches were covered. because there was
A divide.
divide. The piano legs were covered. So the Victorians were absolutely, they were too prudish.
But why so?
Because that was their culture. If you look at them, they buttoned themselves up, and if you see the corsets
corset,
they wore,
huh.
everything was buttoned up. But there was, if you look at erotic art there, they were a raunchy lot, and a lot of paintings are created there, but they were all done not overtly.
That means in every culture, even when it comes to sensuality and sexuality, when there is a thesis, there's always an antithesis also prevalent at the same time.
So what do you do about human nature? There's always love, lust, desire.
It
So what do you do?
We will
You
be talking
can't-
about that tomorrow.
So you can't keep that away.
You can't keep that away.
Yeah.
Ishq aur mushk
हाँ.
छुपाए नहीं छुपते.
Bilkul.
Next.
I'll quickly
Yes.
show you how the body in modern times starts changing. Now these are from the company school. They become more realistic. You'll start seeing that. There's a bigger accent on drawing. This is Durandhar, one of our modernists. If you see, there is a kind of portraiture which is coming in from the west. This is not a kind of fantasy or the kalpana nahi hai. हमारे Indian artists देखिए वो कल्पना में on wings of imagination. This kind of thing where the sitter sat and copies were made, still life, drawing, portraiture. This was brought in by the British. This is Jamini Roy, where you see, again, you see the stylization of the body which comes in from the folk, from their putters, Bengal putters.
And gets more angular here.
Yes,
Up-
some of them.
yes.
Here is Amrita Shergill, a self-portrait. She studied at the Beaux-Arts School and starts looking at her own body. No Indian woman painted her body, her realistic body, in this bold manner. This is her work, all what she saw around. This is Ara. Nude started being painted. The woman's pudendum started being shown, which was not being shown even when naked bodies were done of the yakshis. This is Souza. A huge amount of Western influence comes in modernity, a structured way. This is Jyoti Bhatt. The form starts to be broken. Pradosh Das Gupta in sculpture, Lakshma Gaud. So what do you see in the modern body? It starts getting more and more structured, and many of them also start making it, with Picasso, how he brought in abstraction, and he's actually the father of modernity and modern language in the world. You see the same kind of modernity happening in India as well.
Yeah. We could go on to the contemporary and ask you the questions for modern and contemporary in the same go.
So here you see the contemporary body. You see Akbar Padamsi, how he is looking at a different realism. Look at the collarbones that he's drawing. Look at the nipples of the body, the flat belly button. So you start seeing a different kind of iconography of the woman's body coming in. I also wanted to bring in the living culture, the folk and the tribal, because in India, this is the most unique aspect of Indian culture, that you have the vernacular, the traditional, the modern, and the contemporary walking hand in hand. Happens only in India because we have not had a cultural revolution like how China has had, and there's a total wipeout of the past. Here is Arpita Singh, a very postmodern artist with a feminist gaze, who talks about relationships amongst women, amongst what the woman's aspirations are, the aging body. This is a photographer who's based out of Bangalore, and he used to be a lowly cop, and he started taking photographs, and he takes a lot of photographs of transgendered people as well. This is Indu Antony, who's playing. This is role playing which she's doing, and has turned the canvas onto herself. Nalini Malini videos have been brought in. This is a wonderful poet Meena Kandaswamy, who's also looking at her own body. She's a Dalit writer, she's a Dalit poet, and she uses her identity and her body as an agency of her ideas. This is Kanchan Chandar, who's again she's looking at torsos, women's torsos, and playing with that. This is a photographer called Niranjan, who's looking at body and how women are also, tattooing their body. They are playing with their bodies. They're becoming agents of their own body, which was never done earlier. This is Chinar Shah, and I end with this. This is a transgendered body painted and dressed in bright colors, emphasizing the acceptance and the celebration of body desires.
So the modern and the contemporary has included lots of tribal art and lots of iconography as well. And people started experimenting with their own bodies, drawing on their own bodies. So their bodies became very inclusive of what they wanted to portray. How did this change come around? When you were painting somebody else or using a canvas and then your own body for a portrayal?
I think this is my view. There can be different opinions on that, but I think with modernity, first and foremost, the individual comes into play. If you look at our traditional art, for the longest time ever, even till the Mughal period, very few artists signed. It was a collective work. There was an atelier, there was a master painter or a master craftsman, and under his guidance people did work. People did not sign. People did not say ye mera kaam hai. Slowly over the period of time, and particularly in India, in the turn of the century, around the 19th century, early 20th century, people started signing Hussain, Ara, Souza. I mean, the signature today is worth its name. So if a painting is unsigned, it has no value. So I think it was also a question of identity. I think it was a question of people coming of age. I think it was a question of people talking of taking ownership of what they were doing. And the women in particular started, for example, the national movement. Women came out in a big way. It gave them confidence. They started working. There were women doctors, women scientists. And I really believe, and this is again my personal belief, I really believe that India is again a very unique country. We have not had to fight, our liberation, our empowerment of women is completely different to the empowerment of the West. When women went out to work, there was never a difference of pay scales in India. Our challenges are different. We've had great patriarchy in this country, but in the West, they still have to fight for equal wages. In America, the women came of age in 1966 with the suffragettes and all that. We didn't have all that. I mean, women were so powerful, and what interpretation Devdutt gave yesterday of Parvati and, Bhangeda hai, le jao isko. Look at our goddesses. I mean, they're so powerful. Look at every god. Ganesh with Riddhi and Siddhi. Surya with Usha. All of them had their own partners. And if you look at even the lawgiver Manu, who talks of the fact that every woman is first the mother of a son, the wife of a man, the daughter of a father, but he is the same one who says in that Sanskrit shlok, yatra, what is that shlok? Tatra? No, what is it? Where the woman is not given equal respect, the gods will not be there. Tatra nare, no, yatra naraste pujante, tatra ramayante devata. जहाँ नारी की पूजा होती है, नहीं होती है, नहीं, जहाँ नारी की पूजा होती है वहीं देवताओं का वास होता है. When he says puja, it doesn't mean that, it's gender parity. So you will look and see that in India, women are very, very strong in their personal spaces. It's only in their public spaces that they've had to, fight and do other things. So if you look at all our art, you will see the Devi, for example, ab ye Navratre aa rahe hain, who is, they say even Shiva without Shakti is a Shava. So the great primordial Devi is the woman to whom the greatest of gods also go and pay obeisance to. So what is important in India is a kind of a gender parity which was always there, unlike the West. So our challenges of modernity are always different. Our challenges of the Industrial Revolution has been different because we are a unique culture.
We are a different culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
So it's bound to be. The differences are bound to creep in.
Yeah.
And even in the art forms of India, whether it is visual, whether it is dance, whether it is music, the sensuous and the sacred were never opposed to each other. But has any change crept in now in the modern and the contemporary period? Are the sensual and the sacred different?
See, in thought, they are not. But what is worrisome for me is that in the contemporary, the women are becoming over aggressive now, and they are losing, the beauty of Shringar, the beauty of sensuality, because that is the strength of women. आदमी में उतना रस हो ही नहीं सकता. एक पेंटिंग भी बिना औरत के नहीं रस लगती है मुझे. ठीक है?
We need them to sell the colognes also.
Yeah.
For cars also.
No, and the tires. If
And
you
the
remember
tires,
the
yes.
MRF tire
Yes.
ad.
Yes.
So my thing is that what is sad or maybe a bit disappointing for me is that women should definitely mark their territory. They should definitely demand their rights. But why do they want to be men? Why don't they want the men to open the car door for them? Why should I lug my heavy bag? If a young man is there to help me, why not? That doesn't mean that you become a bimbet. But you should not leave the defining essence of what makes a woman, like the man should not leave the defining essence of what makes a man. So it's like Mark Twain said, the East is East and the West is West and the twain shall never meet. In the same way, I believe a woman is a woman is a woman and a man is a man and a man, and two of them are parallel trajectories, and they together constitute the complete perfect whole.
And yeah, even if you see Jayadev's Geet Govinda would not have been possible had he not written it for his wife. It would not have venerated into his writings, his love and appreciation for his wife. But tell us, you've written about so many poets also in this entire book. Okay. So what about Akka Mahadevi? Not very many people do know about her, but she was a very mystical and a very legendary character, very flamboyant character. Tell us about her.
So, Akka Mahadevi again is interpreted by, she's been taken on by a lot of feminists now. So she becomes the icon of this very fiery feminist. But actually, she was a huge, very, very important devotee. She was in the Bhakti Marg. And for her, she said that, look, I can't be owned by any man. I'm not going to go into a marriage or a relationship with a physical man. But yes, I'm completely devoted to my Lord. And, aspects of bhakti are full of sensuality because you adore your God. And since it's being done by humans, it is not just a very distant, spiritual kind of non-rasa thing. It is full of human emotion. And when you are adoring, even when Akka Mahadevi is adoring her Lord, it is deeply invested with sensuality. But the modern day feminists have taken her and interpreted her into,
Differently.
Yeah, into
Very,
this
very
very
differently.
aggressive kind of woman who went without her clothes and, things
So it
like
became a
that.
very ugly hybrid in their thought process.
I don't know if I'd like to use the word ugly, but how
In their thought,
yeah,
in their
maybe-
thought process,
yeah, and
it became ugly. What
yeah.
was beautiful, what
Yeah.
was sort of limitless in
Yeah.
her thought process just became turned very,
unattractive. Maybe
very
I would say
unattractive,
that,
very
yeah.
grey in their thought.
And I think that this is what I feel sad about. Women becoming overly aggressive, overly masculine, trying to be more, better than the male. It doesn't have to be like that. I think they should enjoy being women. And yes, definitely be firm and strong. And I think there is a great deal of strength in saying it gently.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this was this book that we spoke about. I did not want to do much talking because this is Alka's book and her labor of love, and so much labor at that. It is such a fantastic book. I have a revelation to make. When we were working on the questionnaire here, Alka ji called me up and she said that, she sent out a message that I'll tell my publisher to send this book to you. But when I read about the book, I said, this is not the kind of book that somebody sends to you. This is the kind of book that you buy. Many people might think that this looks expensive, but the kind of hard work and the research and the paintings and the sculpture and the research that has gone into it never comes cheap. This is the kind of book that you don't see. This is the kind of book that you read and you learn from. Believe me, without this book, your knowledge about Indian aesthetics, Indian art, Indian culture, Indian erotica stands totally diminished. So, this is for Alka ji and her book. Go get it from the counter. It's a beautiful book. I'm honored to speak about this book with Alka ji. I'm really most honored that she thought of me as her moderator for a book which is as elevated as this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you for all your kindness.